The spark of conflict. In the year 2234, humanity had cemented its place among the stars, spreading colonies across countless systems and forging tenuous alliances with alien species. The United Earth Alliance, UEA, acted as humanity's diplomatic and military backbone, guiding fragile negotiations in an ever-expanding galactic community. Among these settlements was Eidolon Delta, a bustling trade outpost and cultural melting pot where humans coexisted uneasily with various alien species. Dr. Ilara Voss, a brilliant xenobiologist, had carved a name for herself in the intricate field of alien ecology. Known for her fierce intellect and ability to solve impossible problems, she also happened to be the wife of Commander Dax Voss, a war hero revered for leading humanity's forces during the Gravian invasion. Their love story was one of partnership. Ilara brought logic and compassion, while Dax embodied strength and strategy. Together, they were a formidable team, even in peacetime. Ilara had always preferred quiet intellectual pursuits over the chaos of Dax's military life. Her days on Eidolon Delta were often spent studying alien flora and fauna, exploring the boundaries of biology, and fostering connections between species. On this particular day, she ventured into the Coveal Rift Market, a sprawling bazaar teeming with life from 100 worlds. The air was thick with the sense of alien spices and the sound of overlapping voices, creating a symphony of cultures converging in one chaotic harmony. As Ilara wandered among the stalls, she marveled at the alien artifacts and glowing bioluminescent plants for sale. She stopped at a booth displaying rare mineral samples, intrigued by their crystalline structures. Her hand brushed against one as she reached for it, and in doing so, she inadvertently collided with something, or rather, someone. She looked up, and her heart froze. Standing before her was a towering Rockthar, a member of the gladiatorial Zarkan species. Known for their brute strength and unyielding pride, the Zarkans were bipedal behemoths with skin like polished obsidian, glowing amber eyes, and tusks that jutted from their lower jaws. This particular Zarkan Yakarath was draped in ceremonial armor, etched with glyphs denoting his high status. "You dare touch a Zarkan warrior?" Karatha's voice was a deep, guttural growl that echoed through the market. His words were translated through a collar device, though the venom in his tone needed no interpretation. Ilara immediately stepped back, hands raised in apology. "I didn't mean to offend. It was an accident." But Zarkans were notorious for their rigid sense of honor and their explosive tempers. To Karath, her words were meaningless. To be touched by a lesser being, let alone a human, was an affront to his dignity. Before Ilara could react, Karatha's massive arm shot forward. His clawed hand struck her across the face, sending her sprawling to the ground. Pain flared through her cheek as she landed hard, the taste of copper filling her mouth. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the marketplace fell into a tense silence. Two UEA guards accompanying Ilara immediately stepped forward, weapons half drawn. But Ilara, dazed and bleeding, raised a hand to stop them. "No," she said hoarsely. "Not here." Karath loomed over her, his glowing eyes filled with disdain. "Humans are weak. Learn your place," he sneered, turning to leave as though the matter was settled. Ilara, however, wasn't just any human. She was a diplomat's wife, a scientist, and a woman who had stood at the edges of human endurance. Her hand trembled as she touched the blood on her split lip, but her resolve solidified. She pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the pain, and called after him, her voice calm but cutting. "You've made a mistake." Karath paused, his massive frame tensing. He turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "And what mistake is that?" Ilara squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze despite the tremor of fear that threatened to overtake her. "You've struck the wife of Commander Dax Voss." The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Around them, murmurs spread through the crowd. Dax Voss was a name that carried weight not just among humans but across species. He was a warrior whose victories had reshaped entire sectors of the galaxy. To strike his wife wasn't just a personal offense, it was a declaration of defiance against a legend. Karatha's sneer faltered for a fraction of a second, but pride prevented him from backing down. "Your mate's name does not scare me," he spat. "He is not here to protect you." Ilara's lips curled into a cold, defiant smile. "No, he isn't. But he will hear of this. And when he does, you'll learn exactly what kind of mistake you've made." Before Korath could respond, another Zarkan, a robed elder with a staff adorned in glowing crystals, approached. This was Varric, a diplomat and cultural liaison for the Zarkan people. He quickly assessed the situation, his sharp gaze darting between Korath and Ilara. "Korath, enough!" Varric barked in a commanding tone. "You have disgraced yourself and our people with this rash act." Korath's mandibles clicked in protest, but he stepped back begrudgingly, his glare never leaving Ilara. Varric turned to her, his expression contrite. "Dr. Voss, I offer my deepest apologies. This is not the way of the Zarkan people." Ilara nodded but said nothing. Her focus was already elsewhere, on the storm she knew was about to come. Back at the UEA embassy, word of the incident reached Dax within minutes. He was in a strategy meeting with his advisors when a lieutenant burst in, his face pale. "Commander Voss, sir. There's been an incident at the Koveal Rift Market." Dax's piercing gray eyes locked onto the officer. "What kind of incident?" "It's your wife, sir. She was attacked by a Zarkan warrior." Time seemed to stop. Dax rose slowly from his seat, his towering frame radiating barely restrained fury. "Take me to her," he said, his voice like steel. As he strode toward the medical wing where Ilara was being treated, his mind raced. The Zarkans were powerful allies, but they were also volatile. This attack wasn't just a personal affront, it was a diplomatic nightmare. When he reached her, the sight of the bruise marring her face sent a cold wave of anger through him. "Ilara," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "Are you all right?" She looked up at him, her resolve unwavering despite the pain. "I'll be fine." "But Dax, this can't go unanswered." Dax nodded, his jaw tightening. "It won't." As he stood, his mind was already calculating the next steps. He would confront Korath directly, and if the Zarkans demanded a duel to settle the matter as their customs dictated, he would face it head-on. For Dax Voss, this wasn't just about honor. It was about protecting the one person who meant more to him than anything in the universe. And as the sun set over Eidolon Delta, casting long shadows over the alien city, one thing was certain, the galaxy was about to witness the full wrath of humanity. A commander's wrath. The sun dipped below the jagged horizon of Eidolon Delta, casting an eerie, crimson glow over the colony's domes and spires. Inside the UEA embassy's command center, Commander Dax Voss stood like a storm brewing on the edge of eruption. The air in the room felt heavy, crackling with the intensity of his presence. His officers and advisors watched him in tense silence, knowing full well that when Commander Voss was this quiet, something monumental was about to happen. Dax had just returned from Ilara's side. Seeing her bruised face and the haunted look in her usually steadfast eyes had ignited a fire within him, one that burned hotter than any battlefield fury he had ever known. She had urged him to stay calm, to tread carefully, but Dax knew that the situation demanded more than diplomacy. It demanded strength. Ilara was attacked by Korath, a Zarkan warrior, he said finally, his voice steady but cold. This wasn't just an assault, it was a challenge. The room remained silent, the weight of his words sinking in. The Zarkans were known for their volatile pride and strict adherence to their warrior code. If Dax were to address the insult, it would likely mean engaging in a rights of honor duel, a combat tradition deeply embedded in Zarkan culture. Such a duel wasn't just a fight, it was a spectacle, a ritual that would demand life or death stakes. One of his senior advisors, Lieutenant Marin Kale, stepped forward cautiously. "Sir, if we escalate this, it could jeopardize our diplomatic relations with the Zarkans. They're vital allies in this region. Perhaps we could negotiate through Varric, their elder." Dax's steel-gray eyes flicked to Marin. "Negotiation? Korath struck my wife in a public space. Do you think the Zarkans would accept an apology if the situation were reversed?" "No. They would demand retribution. And so will I." Marin nodded, stepping back. She understood Dax's resolve better than most. He wasn't just a commander but a man driven by loyalty and an unshakable sense of justice. Challenging Korath might be dangerous, but it was also the only way to maintain humanity's dignity in the eyes of their alien counterparts. Dax turned to a communications officer. "Send word to the Zarkin embassy. I want Koroth summoned here within the hour. Let him know that if he refuses, I'll consider it an admission of guilt and weakness. That's not something a Zarkin warrior can live with, is it?" The officer nodded and hurried off to relay the message. Dax's gaze shifted to the holotable in the center of the room, its surface displaying a detailed map of Eidolon Delta. His mind raced through the possible outcomes, calculating every move. He wasn't just fighting for Ilara, he was fighting for humanity's honor, and failure wasn't an option. A tense confrontation. Exactly an hour later, the Zarkin delegation arrived. Varric, the elder diplomat, led the group, his staff tapping rhythmically against the polished floors. Behind him was Koroth, his towering frame encased in ceremonial armor, his amber eyes glowing with contempt. The room seemed to shrink as the Zarkin warrior entered, his presence commanding and suffocating. Dax stood at the far end of the chamber, his hands clasped behind his back. His expression was calm, but his posture radiated authority. Ilara, seated beside Marin, watched from the corner of the room, her cheek still bearing the faint mark of Karotha's attack. Despite her composed demeanor, her heart raced as she braced herself for what was to come. Varric approached first, his mandibles clicking softly in greeting. "Commander Voss, I regret that our paths cross under such unfortunate circumstances. I assure you, the Zarkin Council does not condone Karotha's actions. He acted in haste, and for that, we offer our apologies." Dax's eyes locked onto Koroth, ignoring Varric entirely. "Apologies mean nothing when delivered by someone else's tongue," he said coldly. "Koroth, do you deny what you did?" Karotha's mandibles twitched, and his tusks flared in a defiant snarl. "I do not deny it. The human woman disrespected me." The room tensed. Dax took a deliberate step forward, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Disrespected you? She accidentally touched you in a crowded market. You call that disrespect? You struck her because you thought it would make you look strong. But all it did was prove your weakness." Karotha's claws flexed, his eyes narrowing. "You think yourself above our ways, human? You dare question a Zarkin warrior's honor?" Dax's lips curled into a dangerous smile. "You talk about honor, yet you attack someone unarmed and defenseless. If that's what passes for honor in your culture, then maybe the Zarkins aren't as formidable as the galaxy believes." The insult was deliberate, calculated to provoke. And it worked. Koroth took a step forward, his tusks clicking angrily. "You seek to challenge me, Commander? So be it. A duel under the rights of honor. The arena will decide whose honor is true." Varric's antennae twitched nervously. "Commander Voss, I must caution you." "I accept," Dax interrupted, his tone leaving no room for debate. He turned to Koroth, his gaze unflinching. "We fight tomorrow at sunrise. To the death. Preparations for battle." The hours leading up to the duel were a blur of activity. Ilara paced the confines of their quarters, her mind racing with fears she couldn't suppress. She had seen Dax face impossible odds before, but this was different. Koroth wasn't just a warrior, he was a symbol of Zarkin pride, and his people would ensure he had every advantage. Dax, on the other hand, remained focused. In the embassy's armory, he inspected his combat gear with meticulous care. His armor was a sleek, reinforced exosuit designed to enhance speed and strength, and his weapon of choice, a plasma-forged blade, hummed softly in his hand. But even with advanced technology, he knew this battle would push him to his limits. As he strapped on his armor, Ilara entered the room. She stood silently for a moment, watching him prepare. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but firm. "You don't have to do this, Dax. There has to be another way." He turned to her, his expression softening. "There isn't. You know that as well as I do. If I back down now, it's not just my honor that's at stake, it's humanity's place in this galaxy." Tears glimmered in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Then promise me you'll come back. Promise me this won't be the end." Dax stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her cheek. "I promise," he said softly.
No Zarkan is going to stop me from coming back to you. The arena awaits.
As dawn broke over Eidolon Delta, the Rights of Honor Arena came alive. Situated at the edge of the colony, it was an ancient structure carved into the planet's rocky terrain, its jagged walls bearing the scars of countless duels. Spectators from all walks of life, humans, Zarkans, and other alien species, gathered to witness the battle. Dax stood at the arena's edge, his plasma blade glowing faintly in his hand. Across from him, Korath loomed like a dark storm, his jagged weapon reflecting the sunlight. The crowd fell silent as the Zarkan elder raised his staff, signaling the start of the duel. The battle for honor had begun, the duel of honor. The morning sun cast a pale golden light over the jagged edges of the Rights of Honor arena, its rays filtered through the swirling mists of Eidolon Delta. The arena, an ancient Zarkan battleground, was carved deep into the rocky terrain, its floor cracked and scarred from centuries of combat. Surrounding cliffs bore alien glyphs that told the stories of countless warriors who had fought and died here. Today, a new tale would be etched into its history. Commander Dax Voss stepped into the arena, his movements measured and deliberate. The crowd that had gathered, an audience of humans, Zarkans, and other alien species, watched in tense silence. His combat armor, sleek and black, gleamed under the sunlight, its polished plates reinforced with cutting-edge Earth technology. His plasma blade rested in his hand, its faint hum a subtle reminder of the energy coursing through it. Despite his calm exterior, every fiber of his being was coiled with tension. Across the arena, Korath entered with an air of arrogance, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the cracked ground. The Zarkan warrior's ceremonial armor shimmered with intricate patterns etched in molten gold, a testament to his status among his people. In his clawed hands, he wielded a jagged warblade, a weapon forged not for elegance but for raw destruction. His glowing amber eyes locked onto Dax with a mixture of disdain and bloodlust. The Zarkan elder Varric, who had been chosen to oversee the duel, stepped into the center of the arena. His staff struck the ground, sending a resonant echo through the stone. "This is a duel of honor," Varric's guttural voice boomed, his translator collar rendering the words in perfect English. "Commander Dax Voss of humanity and Korath of the Zarkan warriors will fight to the death. Let the victor's honor be eternal, and may the fallen find peace in their defeat." The crowd roared, a cacophony of alien voices mingling with human cheers. From the stands, Dr. Ilara Voss watched with a mixture of dread and determination. Her heart raced as she gripped the cold metal railing before her, her knuckles white. She hated the necessity of violence, but she also understood. This was about more than honor. It was about survival, respect, and humanity's place among the stars. Varric raised his staff high, then slammed it into the ground. "Begin!" A clash of titans. Korath moved first, closing the distance between them with alarming speed. For a creature his size, he was deceptively agile. His war blade came down in a devastating arc, aimed to cleave Dax in two. But Dax was faster. He sidestepped the blow, the blade striking the ground with enough force to send cracks spidering through the stone. Dax retaliated, his plasma blade flashing as he aimed for the gap between Korath's armor plates. The blade struck true, searing through the Zarkan's side and leaving a smoking wound. Korath snarled, his tusks flaring, but the injury only seemed to enrage him further. He swung again, his blade slicing through the air in a deadly blur. This time, Dax barely managed to block, the impact sending a jolt through his arms. The crowd erupted into cheers and jeers, their voices a chaotic backdrop to the intense battle. Each clash of blades sent sparks flying, the weapons singing with the force of their strikes. Dax knew he couldn't match Korath's brute strength. Instead, he relied on his speed, precision, and the strategic mind that had won him countless battles. The warrior and the strategist. Korath lunged again, his war blade carving a deadly path toward Dax. But this time, Dax anticipated the move. He feinted left, drawing Korath's strike wide, and then rolled to the right, his plasma blade slicing upward in a fluid motion. The blade cut deep into Korath's shoulder, forcing the Zarkan to stagger back. The crowd gasped, and even the Zarkan spectators began to murmur in surprise. Few had ever seen one of their warriors wounded so decisively in a duel. Korath let out a guttural roar, his mandibles clicking furiously.
You fight like a coward, human. Face me with honor.
Dax straightened, his breath coming in measured gasps.
Honor? You speak of honor after attacking an unarmed woman in a market? Let me show you what real honor looks like. The taunt struck a nerve.
Korath charged, his footsteps shaking the ground.
Dax held his ground until the last possible moment, then activated the thrusters on his combat boots.
The sudden burst of speed propelled him over Korath's head, and as he flipped midair, he slashed downward with his blade.
The plasma weapon cut through the back of Korath's armor, leaving another smoking wound. The turning point.
For a moment, it seemed as though Dax had the upper hand.
But Korath was far from defeated.
The Zarkan warrior spun around with shocking speed, one of his massive arms catching Dax midair. The blow sent Dax flying, his body slamming into the arena wall. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Dax collapsed to the ground, his armor sparking from the impact. Ilara's breath hitched, her hands gripping the railing so tightly that her nails bit into her palms. "Get up," she whispered, her voice trembling.
"Please, get up." Korath advanced, his heavy footsteps echoing in the sudden silence.
He loomed over Dax, his war blade raised high.
"This is the strength of humanity," he mocked.
"Pathetic." But Dax wasn't finished.
As Korath brought his blade down, Dax rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike. He pushed himself to his feet, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead.
His plasma blade flickered, but its glow remained steady. "You've made one fatal mistake, Korath," Dax said, his voice low but steady.
"You underestimated me." The final blow.
Korath roared and lunged again, his movements growing more reckless with each passing moment.
Dax sidestepped the attack, his plasma blade cutting through Korath's exposed flank.
The Zarkan stumbled, his wounds beginning to take their toll. Sensing an opening, Dax pressed the advantage. With a burst of speed, he closed the distance between them. His plasma blade flashed in a series of precise strikes, each one exploiting the weak points in Korath's armor. The final blow came in a devastating upward arc, the blade piercing through the Zarkan's chest. Korath's amber eyes widened in shock, and his massive form collapsed to the ground with a heavy thud.
For a moment, the arena was silent. Then, the crowd erupted into chaos.
Human spectators cheered, their voices rising in triumph, while the Zarkan contingent watched in stunned disbelief.
Ilara exhaled a shaky breath, relief washing over her like a tidal wave. Victory and the fallout. Dax stood over Korath's lifeless body, his chest heaving with exertion.
His plasma blade flickered and died, the faint hum fading into silence.
Varric stepped forward, his expression unreadable.
"The duel is over," Varric declared.
"Commander Dax Voss has proven his honor."
But even as the words echoed through the arena, Dax knew this wasn't the end. The Zarkans were a proud people, and Korath's death would not go unchallenged. This was only the beginning of a much larger battle, one that would test not only his strength but the very fabric of humanity's place in the galaxy.
As he turned to leave the arena, his gaze met Ilara's.
Her eyes were filled with equal parts relief and concern. He gave her a small nod, silently promising that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The galaxy had witnessed humanity's resilience, but the true fight was still to come.
The shadows of vengeance.
The dust of the Rights of Honor arena had barely settled when the reality of what had transpired began to take shape. The crowd dispersed slowly, murmurs of disbelief and awe rippling through both human and Zarkan onlookers. Commander Dax Voss walked from the battlefield, his armor scratched and dented, his movements slow and deliberate. The weight of what he had just done pressed down on him. He had emerged victorious, but the consequences of his actions were already looming like a storm on the horizon. In the distance, Dr. Ilara Voss waited, standing among a group of UEA officials and soldiers. Her eyes never left Dax as he approached, her heart pounding with relief and dread in equal measure. He had survived, but the scars of the duel, both physical and emotional, were etched deeply into him. When he finally reached her, she stepped forward, her voice low but firm.
"You did it, Dax. You won. But this isn't over, is it?"
Dax shook his head, his steel-gray eyes hard with resolve.
"No. It's only just beginning. The fallout begins. The UEA embassy was tense in the hours following the duel.
Inside the Grand Council chamber, Dax and Ilara sat at a long table surrounded by senior diplomats and military advisors. The holographic display in the center of the table projected the arena footage on a loop, showing Dax's final, decisive strike against Korath. "The Zarkans are furious," said Ambassador Jana Marin, her voice taut with worry. She was a veteran diplomat, her silver hair pulled back into a tight bun. "Word has already spread to their homeworld.
Korath wasn't just any warrior, he was the scion of the Kornath bloodline.
His family is one of the most powerful in their society."
Dax leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. "They challenged me. They demanded this duel. What did they expect to happen?"
"They expected him to win," Jana replied.
"You defeating Korath isn't just a loss for them, it's a humiliation.
His family will see this as a stain on their honor, and they'll demand retribution."
Dax's jaw tightened.
He had anticipated this, but hearing it confirmed only solidified the gravity of the situation.
"Then let them come. We won't back down."
Ilara, who had remained quiet until now, finally spoke. "We can't afford to think of this as a personal vendetta, Dax.
This isn't just about you or me anymore.
The Zarkans respect strength, but their society is built on pride and revenge.
If we're not careful, this could escalate into an all-out war."
Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable.
The room fell silent as the weight of the situation settled on everyone present. An unexpected ally. Later that evening, as the colony's twin moons rose over the alien landscape, a visitor arrived at the embassy.
Varric, the Zarkan elder who had overseen the duel, requested a private audience with Dax and Ilara. The three of them met in a secure chamber, away from prying eyes and ears. Varric stood tall and imposing, his ceremonial robes flowing around his armored frame. His multifaceted eyes gleamed in the dim light, and his mandibles clicked softly as he began to speak. "Commander Voss, Dr. Voss," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I come not as an emissary of my people, but as an observer of truth. What you did today was extraordinary. Few beings have ever bested a warrior of Koratha's stature." Dax crossed his arms, his expression guarded.
"If you're here to warn me about his family seeking vengeance, I already know."
Varric inclined his head slightly.
"It is true that the Kornath bloodline will not let this matter rest.
They will come for you, Commander.
But they will not come alone."
Ilara frowned.
"What do you mean?" "Koratha's death will be a rallying cry," Varric explained. "His family will not simply challenge you, they will incite others. Rival factions within my people will see this as an opportunity to gain power by fanning the flames of conflict.
Your victory has shaken the balance of our society, and there are those who would exploit that chaos."
Ilara exchanged a worried glance with Dax. "So this isn't just about honor. It's about politics." Varric nodded.
"Precisely. There is more at stake here than pride. If the Kornath bloodline succeeds in framing this as an affront to all Zarkans, it could unite the warrior clans against humanity. But there is another path."
Dax's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting?"
Varric stepped closer, his voice lowering.
"I have no love for the Kornath bloodline.
Their dominance has stifled progress within our society for generations.
If you are willing, I can help you. Together, we can navigate this situation and prevent it from spiraling into war." Dax studied the Zarkan elder carefully.
He was cautious by nature, and trusting an alien, especially one with his own agenda, did not come easily. But he also understood the value of an ally in a fight like this.
"What's in it for you?" Dax asked bluntly.
Varric's mandibles twitched in what might have been a smile.
"If the Kornath bloodline falls, so too does their stranglehold on our politics.
It would pave the way for a more balanced future for my people, a future where diplomacy and cooperation are not overshadowed by blood feuds and warfare." Ilara stepped forward, her voice steady.
"If we agree to work with you, how do we ensure this doesn't backfire? How do we know we can trust you?" Varric met her gaze, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the dim light. You don't. But consider this, if we do nothing, war is inevitable. My offer is your best chance to avoid it. Dax exchanged a long look with Ilara. Finally, he nodded. All right, Varric. We'll work with you. But if this is some kind of trap, you'll regret it. Varric inclined his head once more. I would expect nothing less, Commander. Preparing for the inevitable. Over the next several days, Dax, Ilara, and their team worked tirelessly to prepare for what was to come. With Varric's guidance, they began to unravel the web of alliances and rivalries within Zarkan society. They identified key factions that might be swayed to their side and began crafting a strategy to counter the Kornath bloodline's inevitable retaliation. Meanwhile, Dax trained relentlessly. He knew that more challenges would come, and each one would be deadlier than the last. Ilara, too, played her part, using her knowledge of alien cultures to anticipate the moves of their enemies and find weaknesses they could exploit. As the days turned into weeks, the tension on Eidolon Delta grew palpable. The colony streets were filled with whispers of impending conflict, and the UEA embassy became a fortress, its defenses bolstered against potential attacks. But even as they prepared for the worst, Dax and Ilara knew that their greatest weapon wasn't technology or strategy, it was their unbreakable bond. Together, they had faced impossible odds before, and together, they would face whatever the galaxy threw at them next. The gathering storm. Eidolon Delta had become a powder keg, its once bustling streets now simmering with tension as rumors of Zarkan retaliation spread like wildfire. The aftermath of Commander Dax Voss's duel against Korath had cast a long shadow, drawing the attention of not just the Zarkans but also other alien factions and opportunistic powers. The fragile peace that the colony once enjoyed now hung by a thread, and every diplomat, trader, and soldier could feel the weight of the impending storm. Dax stood in the command center of the UEA embassy, his sharp gray eyes scanning a holographic display of known Zarkan territories. Markers flashed in red, representing potential Kornath strongholds, while yellow pings identified neutral or allied factions. The map was a mosaic of alliances and grudges, a visual representation of the chaos his duel had unleashed. Beside him, Dr. Ilara Voss studied a separate hologram displaying intercepted Zarkan communications. Her expertise in alien linguistics had proven invaluable in deciphering the intricate codes and cultural nuances embedded in their messages. They're consolidating support faster than we expected, Ilara said, her voice steady but laced with concern. The Kornath bloodline is framing your victory as a direct insult to Zarkan honor, not just their families. They're calling for a unified response. Dax's jaw tightened as he crossed his arms. How many clans have pledged their support? Ilara glanced at the hologram. So far, 3 major clans have publicly aligned with the Kornath. 2 others are still deliberating, but their communications suggest they're leaning toward support. Dax exhaled sharply. That's half the Zarkan warrior houses. If they all rally under the Kornath banner, we're looking at a war we can't win. From the corner of the room, Varric stepped forward, his imposing frame casting a long shadow across the holograms. The Zarkan elder had proven to be a valuable ally, his insights into his people's political dynamics shedding light on the intricate web of allegiances that governed their society. Not all is lost, Commander, Varric said, his deep voice resonating in the quiet room. The Kornath's grip is strong, but it is not absolute. There are those who resent their dominance and would welcome a shift in power. Dax turned to him, his expression hard. Then we need to act now. If we wait too long, their momentum will become unstoppable. A risky alliance. Varric proposed a bold plan, a covert meeting with the leaders of the Tverin and Valkar clans, 2 influential factions known for their independence and deep-seated grievances against the Kornath bloodline. If they could be convinced to stand against the Kornath, it might be enough to fracture the Zarkan coalition and prevent a full-scale war. The meeting was to take place on Draxus Prime, a neutral trading hub far from Eidolon Delta. The Tverin and Valkar leaders would only agree to the meeting if it remained secret and if both Dax and Varric attended in person, a condition that carried significant risk. Ilara was the first to voice her objections. This is dangerous, Dax. You'll be walking into a room full of Zarkan warriors who might see killing you as their ticket to glory.
I don't have a choice, Dax replied firmly. If we don't act now, the Kornath will consolidate their power, and the galaxy will see it as humanity's failure to control the situation. We'll lose everything we've fought for. Ilara's eyes narrowed. Then I'm going with you. No, Dax said immediately. It's too dangerous. Ilara crossed her arms, her expression unyielding. I'm not asking for permission, Dax. You'll need someone who understands Zarkan culture and language to navigate this. And besides, you know I'm not going to sit here while you risk your life. Dax sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing with her. He had always admired her determination, even when it frustrated him. Fine, he relented. But you stay close to me at all times. No risks. The meeting on Draxus Prime. Draxus Prime was a sprawling metropolis of gleaming spires and labyrinthine streets, its neon-lit corridors teeming with beings from across the galaxy. The meeting was set to take place in a hidden chamber beneath a massive trading complex, its location known only to the participants. Dax, Ilara, and Varric arrived under the cover of darkness, escorted by a small team of UEA operatives. As they descended into the subterranean chamber, the air grew thick with tension. The room was dimly lit, its walls adorned with Zarkan glyphs that glowed faintly in the dark. Seated at the far end of the chamber were the leaders of the Tverin and Volkar clans. Chief Trask, a wiry Zarkan with piercing green eyes and an air of cunning, represented the Tverin. Beside him sat Matriarch Valara, a towering figure clad in ornate armor, her every movement exuding strength and authority. Commander Voss, Trask began, his voice a low hiss. You are either very brave or very foolish to come here. Perhaps both, Dax replied evenly. But I'm here because I believe we can find common ground. Valara's mandibles twitched as she leaned forward. Speak quickly, human. Why should we stand against the Kornath? They are powerful, and their call to arms resonates with many. Dax met her gaze without flinching. The Kornath don't care about Zarkan honor. They care about control. They're using Karatha's death as a pretext to tighten their grip on your society. If they succeed, the Tverin and Volkar clans will be next on their list of targets. Trask let out a low, clicking laugh. You speak boldly for someone with so much to lose. Because I know what's at stake, Dax said, his voice rising with conviction. This isn't just about humanity or Zarkan pride. It's about stopping the Kornath from dragging us all into a war that benefits no one but themselves. You know I'm right. Valara regarded him silently for a long moment, her glowing eyes unreadable. Finally, she spoke. Your words carry weight, Commander. But words alone will not sway us. We need proof that the Kornath's ambitions threaten more than just your people. Varric stepped forward. We have intercepted communications that show the Kornath planning to overthrow the Zarkan Council and install their own leadership. If you align with Commander Voss, we can expose their schemes and restore balance to our society. The room fell silent as the two leaders exchanged a long, deliberative look. Finally, Trask spoke. If what you say is true, then we may have common cause. But be warned, Commander, if this is a trap, we will not hesitate to destroy you. Dax nodded. Understood. But I give you my word, this is no trap. The looming threat. As the meeting concluded, Dax and his team returned to their ship, the weight of their tentative alliance both a relief and a new burden. The Tverin and Volkar clans had agreed to stand against the Kornath, but their support was conditional and fragile. The slightest misstep could unravel everything. Ilara sat beside Dax in the cockpit, her hand resting on his. We've bought ourselves some time, she said softly. But this is far from over. Dax nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond the viewport. No, it's not. The Kornath won't stop until they're either victorious or destroyed. And if they come for us, we'll be ready. As the ship slipped into hyperspace, the distant hum of its engines echoed the tension in Dax's mind. The battle for honor had transformed into a battle for survival, and the galaxy itself now teetered on the edge of chaos.